Welcome to Cameron and Miliband Live, the battle for number 10. Good evening. Tonight sees the first big election test for two men, one of whom will be the UK's next Prime Minister. David Cameron and Ed Miliband are the only people with a genuine chance of forming the next government. Tonight, we'll see what they're made of.
Over the next 90 minutes, both men will face Jeremy head-to-head, and they'll also answer the questions of our studio audience. Running quickly through the order of play, David Cameron will be interviewed by Jeremy, then join me to take questions from our audience. After that, Ed Miliband will face questions from the studio, and we finish with his head-to-head with Jeremy. So, let's get to it. The election starts here and now. First up, the Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, David Cameron.
David Cameron, do you know how many food banks there were in this country when you came to power?
I don't have the exact figures, but I know that usage of food banks has gone up, and there are many amazing volunteers who man those food banks and provide an important service.
There were 66 when you came to power. There are now 421. 900,000 people took food parcels last year, free food parcels. You talked about broken Britain and fixing it. You haven't. It's more broken now than it was.
Well, I don't accept that, because if you look at what's happened with our economy, there are 1.89 million more people in work than when I became Prime Minister. We've got 900,000 fewer people on out-of-work benefits.
Is an increase in food banks a mark of success?
Look, obviously there has been an increase in food bank use. That's partly because of the difficulties we faced as a country. It's also, Jeremy, because we changed the rules. The previous government didn't allow job centres to advertise the existence of food banks. They thought it would be bad PR. I thought that was a wrong decision. I thought it was a poor decision. So we allowed them to point people towards food banks if they needed them. But look, the big picture is we want to get more people back to work. We've turned the economy around, and it's jobs that are the best route out of poverty.
Is it acceptable in a rich country like ours that there are that number of people depending on free food aid?
Obviously, I want fewer people to be using food banks, and I want more people to have the security of a job. But we have created 1,000 jobs for every day this government's been in office. Now, that's a statistic, but behind that statistic are people who are able to provide for their families, who are earning a wage, who are able to build a better life.
How many of those jobs are zero-hours contracts?
About 1 in 50 jobs are zero-hours contracts. Yeah. So this is an important point.
Could you live on a zero-hours contract?
No. Some people choose a zero-hours contract, for instance, students, because they want the flexibility. But what we did is, well, hold on a second, we outlawed, first government to do this, the idea of exclusive zero-hours contracts where you can only work for one business. So we passed a law saying that shouldn't happen. But it is a myth, as some people want to say. The jobs that have been created are all low-paid jobs. That's not true.
No one's saying.
Well,
I'm not saying
but the hint you're trying to give is that
I'm saying there are 700,000 people on zero-hours contracts. Could you live on one?
No, look. As I said,
could
some
you
people.
Live on one?
Well, I want to create a country where more people have the opportunity of the full-time work that they want.
Could you live on a zero-hours contract?
Well, look, that's not the question. The question is...
Well, it's the question I'm asking.
Well, yeah, look, but the point is some people choose a zero-hours contract. If you're a student, for instance, and you want to do some part-time work, a zero-hours contract can work for you. That's why we haven't outlawed them altogether. What we've outlawed is exclusive zero-hours contracts. And no, I couldn't live on one of those, and that's why we outlawed them.
But the person, for example, a colleague of mine this morning spoke to a man in the northeast, Patrick. He walks 4 hours to and from work. When he gets there, he doesn't know whether he's on for 1 hour or 2 hours, or if he's lucky, longer, and then he has to walk home again. He gets £6.75 an hour. He works between 8 and 12 hours a week on average. Now, is that any way to live?
No, I want more people to have part-time, not to have part-time work, to have full-time work, and that is what's happening in our economy. Look, it has been difficult. We've had a very difficult few years following the longest and deepest recession virtually in our country's history. Now, we're coming out of that. We created 1.89 million new jobs. That's 1,000 a day. The majority of those have been full-time jobs, not part-time jobs. Most of them have been in relatively well-paid occupations. Only 1 in 50 jobs is a 0-hours contract, and some people choose those contracts. But if you're asking me, do I want more people to have the dignity and security of work and a regular wage? Yes. Do I want a higher minimum wage? Yes. And we've seen the minimum wage increase now above inflation for the first time in many years. And I want to see that minimum wage go through £7, on to £8. And crucially, Jeremy, in terms of what the government can do, we have cut taxes. So we've taken the 3 million lowest paid people in our country out of income tax altogether. So you can earn now £10,600 before you start paying income tax at all. And I think that is vitally important, and that's been the priority for the government.
So you couldn't live on a 0-hours contract. And this is one of the things people really find problematic about you. I'm going to be personal, if I may, for a second.
You can.
It is that you would choose, for example, to appoint a man who oversaw tax avoidance as a minister in your government, another rich person. That you would choose to appoint to the heart of government a rich newspaper editor whose newspaper hacked people's phones. That you choose to defend a rich television presenter who thumps a colleague. Now, what do you have in common with all these very rich people?
Let's take these in turn, because let's take this in turn, because I think that is completely unjustified. Let's take Stephen Green, who was head of HSBC. He had been appointed by my predecessor, Gordon Brown, to run his Business Advisory Council. I appointed him as a trade minister in a move that was welcomed across the political spectrum, across British industry, as someone who had run a bank responsibly. Now, I don't know whether there was wrongdoing subsequently at HSBC. We'll have to see. But nobody criticised that appointment at the time.
Did you ask him about it?
I didn't ask him about that specific question, but we went through all the normal processes and procedures that you would with appointing a minister, proper checks, including checks by the Inland Revenue into someone's tax affairs, and so it was properly dealt with. Now, if you want to raise the issue of Jeremy Clarkson, I said very clearly I didn't know what had happened, and so I wasn't going to comment extensively. I just simply answered a question I was asked, explaining he was a friend of mine, he's a talent, and I hope it could be resolved. But I'm absolutely clear, look, treating the people you work with badly is not acceptable. The BBC have made their decision, and that's absolutely right for them. So I think the aspersion you're trying to cast, I think, is completely ridiculous. What I have done for the last 5 years is lead a government that has got the economy growing, has got people back to work, has cut the taxes of the poorest people in our country. I'm not saying we've achieved everything we've set out to do, but the country is immeasurably stronger.
Let's come to the question of the economy then. Apart from broken Britain, one of your slogans last time was that the country was overwhelmed in debt. Overwhelmed was the word you used. How much money have you borrowed?
Well, we have cut the budget deficit in half as a share of GDP.
How much money have you borrowed?
Well, look, the key thing is the amount of money you borrow every year, the deficit.
Do you know what it is?
That is down in half. I know that we have borrowed a lot of money because the deficit adds to your debt every year.
Do you know what the figure is?
Well, you're going to tell me, Jeremy, presumably.
I am. It's a mere £500 billion.
Well, that is a lot less than the previous government was borrowing.
No, it isn't. It's more than the previous government borrowed.
The annual overdraft, the deficit, has come down by one half as a share of GDP, and the total stock, the debt as a share of our national income is now falling. Now, we haven't finished the job. We have been working to a plan, and the British people have been working incredibly hard to that plan of turning the economy around, getting the deficit down, having public services that we can afford, and creating jobs and livelihoods for all our people. That is what we have been doing. Now, if you're saying we haven't gone fast enough to cut the deficit, I would agree we need to complete the job. But all my political opponents have been saying we should borrow more, we should spend more, we should tax more. That's the alternative that you face with Ed Miliband and his approach.
My point is merely the chasm between what was said and what was actually done. Let's take another one. Let's take immigration. You promised at the last election that you would reduce immigration to the level it was at in the early 1990s, tens of thousands a year. Do you know how many people you actually let in?
No, immigration has not been cut to the tens of thousands.
No, it hasn't. You failed.
Well, what we did is we cut immigration from outside the European Union. That is down by 13%. We closed down about 800 bogus education colleges, which were really visa factories. But inside the European Union, immigration has increased, I'm afraid not least because we've actually created more jobs in Britain than the rest of the European Union put together. The European Union's economy has been so stagnant that people have come here to work. So what we need to do now is keep the economy working, but fix the broken welfare system. And I'm going to just make this point, if you'll let me. There are some key changes I'm going to make, which is that if you come from Europe to Britain, you cannot claim unemployment benefit. If you don't have a job in 6 months, you'll have to return to the country you came from. You'll have to work here for 4 years, paying into the system before you get tax credits or benefits out of the system. And while you're here, you can't send child benefit home to the family if they're living in another country. Now, those changes taken together, key welfare changes, will reduce immigration quite markedly from inside the EU.
It's not what you said last time. You said, quote, no ifs, no buts. We make a promise to the British people that we will reduce immigration to the level it was at in the early 1990s. You've not done it.
Well, I believe that is still the right ambition, and we achieved a cut from outside the EU,
it was
but
a
inside
no ifs,
the EU,
no buts promise, not an ambition.
Inside the EU, we haven't achieved it, but we need to make these welfare changes in order to do it.
But you accept you haven't met the promise there.
We've not met the commitment that I made. I fully accept that.
Right. There's a whole credibility problem here, isn't there? Because one of the other things you said, and you repeated it again this week, yesterday, I think, you said, we're not going to raise VAT. You said exactly the same thing before the last election. We have no plans to raise VAT. You said it to my face twice at the time of the last election. And then the moment you got into government, you did raise VAT.
Well, there's a crucial difference on this occasion. We are the government. We've been able to look very carefully at the books. We know what is necessary in the next Parliament, and our plans do not involve tax increases on VAT or national insurance or income tax. It's very clear about that. We know what needs to be done. And let me explain, because I think people watching at home want to know what is the scale of what needs to be done. We need to save, for the next 2 years, 1 out of every £100 that the government spends. Now, I think it is the right approach to try and find £1 of waste in £100 of government spending, rather than to put up everybody's taxes, which is what my political opponents want to do. So you've got a choice. Bear down on waste and get public spending under control, or put up taxes with my opponents. That's the choice.
But again, you said one thing and you did another.
Well, we said that the most important task for the government was to get the economy growing, was to get jobs growing, and was to get the deficit down. And I would say on any analysis, and we had an appalling inheritance. We inherited a situation where Britain's budget deficit was forecast to be bigger than Greece's. Now, we had to take difficult decisions. I will defend all of those decisions, difficult ones, ones that were hard to take, but the right thing for the country. And the result, there's a connection between the difficult decisions we had to take and the fact that we now have the fastest growing economy of any major Western economy. We've created 2 million private sector jobs. We've got 750,000 more businesses. The British economy is working. Now we need to make sure that people can... You know, what I want is an economy that doesn't just look good on the page. I want people to feel that they can get a job, they can have a livelihood, they can buy a home, they can get a good school place for their children, they can enjoy a retirement. Those are the things. But that's what this plan, Jeremy, is all about.
In the spirit of transparency, can you tell us where this £12 billion in welfare cuts is going to come from?
Well, let me explain. We've said that there's a £30 billion adjustment that needs to be made, and the other political parties have voted for this too. And we've said that breaks down into 13 billion that needs to be saved in government departments, 12 billion in welfare, and 5 billion from cracking down on tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. Now, when it comes to the welfare, we've identified, for instance, freezing in-work benefits like unemployment benefit for 2 years to raise some of that money. But the 12 billion, right, the 12 billion
10 billion of which you've yet to explain.
That compares with 20 billion that was saved in the last Parliament, in this current Parliament, by this government on welfare. So this is well within the range of what we can do if we continue with the sort of plans that we put in place.
Do you know where these cuts will fall?
Well, we know that it is possible to make the savings in welfare, like we made 20 billion of welfare savings.
I don't want to be rude, but do you know, and you're not telling us, Or do you not know?
No, we know there will be difficult decisions, and we'll have to go through every part of the welfare budget. But we believe just as we've saved 20 billion in welfare in this Parliament, we will be able to find a further 10 billion of welfare savings in the next Parliament. Let me give you some more examples. We're going to cut the welfare cap we put in place, saying no family should get more than £26,000 a year in welfare. We're going to reduce that to £23,000.
That's not within the missing 10 billion.
We think that's the right thing to do. We're going to say when it comes to young people, that young people, when they leave school, they should be either earning or learning. They should be doing an apprenticeship, looking at higher education. They shouldn't be able to go straight on to unemployment benefit and housing benefit. All of these things, changing welfare, Jeremy, isn't just about saving money.
No.
It's about trying to help people's lives. It's about trying to... Well, I'm just
talk about transparency and you don't tell us what you're going to do.
Well,
let me ask you something. Let me ask you a very simple question about something else, about foreign policy, because we're going to be out of time shortly. What do you think has been your biggest foreign policy disaster?
Well, look, other people, I'm sure, will highlight difficult things that we've had to deal with.
Well, what did you find the greatest reverse?
Well, I would argue that some good things we've done are cutting the European budget, first government to achieve that, getting out of the Euro bailout scheme, so British taxpayers aren't giving money to Greece. Those, I would say, are successes. I think we've got a very challenging situation today in Libya. I think it was right to get rid of...
Do you regret going to Libya and promising the people... You promised. You used the word promise. The people of Britain and France will stand by you as you build your country and your democracy. Those were your words. Do you regret saying that?
No.
You haven't even got an embassy in Libya at present.
I don't regret saying that. I mean, first of all, I think it was right with France and America to stop Colonel Gaddafi when he was going to butcher his own people in Benghazi. If we had not stepped in, if I hadn't ordered those aeroplanes into the sky, we would have seen a massive catastrophe in Benghazi of people butchered. It was the right thing to do. Now, I don't accept that we left the Libyan people after that. We put in aid, we put in military training, we put in political assistance. It just hasn't been possible to date to get the different parties in Libya...
Christians are being beheaded on the beach.
Well, it hasn't been possible to get the different Libyan parts of government together, to get the warlords to put down their weapons, but we're still trying, even now, with people out there, trying to bring that about. But it has been, I accept, a very difficult situation.
Can I ask you one quick question about Europe? What would it take for you to vote no in a referendum on our continued participation in the European Union?
Well, if I didn't think it was in Britain's interest to stay in the European Union, I wouldn't argue for our membership. I mean, I think the situation today is that what we need is a reform of the European Union and then a referendum where the British people, not me, but the British people watching at home, they have the choice in an in-out referendum by the end of 2017.
By implication, then, surely our current membership is intolerable.
No, what I think is we need to improve on our current membership. This organisation works to an extent for us. We get the trade, we get important cooperation, but Europe isn't working properly. That's why we need the renegotiation. That's why I think those who say just have a referendum straight away, I think we'd be giving the British people a false choice. I want to give a proper choice, stay in a reformed organisation or leave, but it will be the British people's choice. And I will make this point, Jeremy, there's only one way to get a referendum, and that is to make sure I'm Prime Minister after the next election, because none of my principal opponents will promise a referendum.
You've said you're not going to stand for a third term. That means that a vote for Cameron is a vote, if you're successful, for Cameron as leader of his party and Prime Minister, perhaps, for 2, 3, 4 years, after which it's Boris Johnson or George Osborne or Theresa May or Sajid Javid or Uncle Tom Cobley.
Now, if you vote Conservative, I've said I will serve every day of a full second term. What I was doing in that interview was just giving a honest answer to an honest question, because I think people need to know that sort of thing. Are you one of those leaders who, like sort of Chairman Mao, who thinks you can go on and on and on and on? Or actually, do you think, look, I'm really passionate about what I'm doing. I think we're turning this country around. I'm passionate about having another term, completing this vital work. But after that, 10 years, 2 terms, I think politicians do have a date by which they need to say, well, I think it's time for someone else to take over. I'm not some person who thinks that you're indispensable. We're not indispensable. It's important to remember that.
David Cameron, thank you. Now, coming next, questions to Mr. Cameron from our studio audience.
Welcome back to Cameron and Miliband Live, the battle for number 10. The Prime Minister has been interviewed by Jeremy Paxman, and now it's the turn of our studio audience to put their questions to him. So without further ado, Prime Minister, here we go. Let's start with Matthew Brown. Where are you, Matthew? There's Matthew. Let's have your question, Matthew.
Prime Minister, what do you think are Ed Miliband's best qualities?
Well, that's a tricky one to start with, but thank you, Matthew, for the question. Look, I think all of us who put ourselves forward all actually believe in serving the public, in trying to do the right thing. We disagree with each other, sometimes passionately, sometimes, as yesterday in the House of Commons, rather noisily, but we all believe in public service in trying to do the right thing for our country. One thing I admire about Ed is that when we had to take difficult decisions about sending British forces in to help with others to try and defeat ISIL, the murderous death cult in Iraq, he stepped forward and said, yes, this is the right thing to do, David, let's do that together and vote together in the House of Commons, and I admired that.
But you did call him weak and despicable, didn't you? We
do sometimes in the House of Commons use phrases that perhaps afterwards we think perhaps was a bit over the top.
So
I took my... Well, I remember the same day he called me dodgy and something else. So sometimes I took my children yesterday, and Nancy and Elwyn, they're 9 and 11, and they said afterwards, you know, Dad, if we behave like that at school, you know, it wouldn't be so good. So I was trying to explain. Sometimes it gets a bit heated. There is a point to it, though, which is it's the time of the week when the Prime Minister's got to demonstrate that you're across all the issues, and so it does make the government accountable to Parliament in a way that if you're not across the issues, then things will change pretty quickly. So it does have a point, but we don't always behave as well as we should.
OK, let's bring in Bridget Sam Bailey next, should we? I think Bridget's there in the front row.
Thank you.
Hi, Bridget.
Prime Minister, in a few months' time, I would be 79. I'm a retired professional. Following a road traffic accident, I've been left with physical challenges. Yet, I remain proactive in the community. I'm passionate about the provision of care for the elderly. And I feel that we should be treated with dignity and respect. Would you, Prime Minister, consider it appropriate to appoint a cabinet minister for older people, one who would show empathy with older people?
Well, Bridget, first of all, thank you for your advocacy for these causes, because they do really matter. And I think making sure we treat retired people with dignity and security in their old age after a full working life is one of the most important things we can do as a country. And that's why I've been so clear that the pensioner benefits, like the free TV licences, the free prescriptions, the winter fuel payments, they will continue for everybody. I think it should be your right, and we need to make that very clear. Now, I was asked this question the other day about should we have a dedicated older person's representative in the Cabinet. I will think about it, but I'm a little bit worried about it on this basis. I don't want older people's concerns to be sort of restricted to one person in the Cabinet. I want every one of my ministers to be thinking, how do we treat senior citizens properly? I want my health minister to be thinking, how do we treat people in our hospitals and in our care homes? Are we doing this right? I want to make sure that our education minister is thinking about through-life education that some people want to continue with forever. I want to make sure that our defence minister is thinking really carefully about veterans and their needs as they grow older. So I'd be worried about possibly having one person and saying they were the only person who thought about older people. In the end, as I said to this meeting the other day, you know, if we're not doing right by older people, don't blame all my ministers, blame me, because I lead the government and I think we've got to get this right. But pensioners have been absolutely key to this government about uprating pension in line with earnings, prices, or 2.5%, the so-called triple lock, so that pensioners have been protected from some of the difficult decisions we've had to take.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Let's bring in Tom Cosgrove next. Hi, Tom. You approached us via the Sky News app. Where are you, Tom?
Yeah.
Hi, Tom. What's your question for the Prime Minister?
It has been argued that we haven't seen anything yet in terms of cuts to public services. How intense will these be from a majority Conservative government?
Right. What I'd say is, look, we have had to make difficult decisions, and a lot of those decisions I didn't want to have to make, but I became Prime Minister at a time when the economy was close to the brink, when our budget deficit was forecast actually to be higher than Greece's, and we had to make important decisions to get the deficit down, because a big deficit means higher taxes, it means higher mortgage rates, it means lost jobs, it means an economy in chaos, and I wanted to stop that. Now, what we've done so far has got the deficit down by half, as I was saying to Jeremy, and what we need to do in the next 2 years is basically similar to what we've done so far. We've got to find £1 out of every 100 the government spends and save that rather than putting up people's taxes. So if you think of the department spending changes, it's similar to what we've had to do in previous years, and similarly for welfare. It is achievable. I wouldn't stand here and say that if I didn't believe that. I really want to do this without putting up taxes on hard-working people, because you don't tax your way to growth, you don't tax your way to jobs. We want to keep the strong economy, make these savings, and make sure that we do put aside money for a rainy day, so that when a next crisis hits, and crises do come from time to time, we don't get pushed over the edge. And that would be so irresponsible, because in the end, we've got to make sure we're not just doing right for this generation, we're doing right for our children and grandchildren. We don't want to load debts on their heads that they won't be able to pay. So what we're suggesting is manageable, it's doable, it will require efficiencies, but we can also make important commitments, like saying the NHS is special, that will get extra money every year as long as I'm Prime Minister.
Presumably, Tom, you would want a specific example, would you, of where the Prime Minister is going to save money, where the cuts might be?
Yeah.
There you go, Prime Minister.
Well, I gave, I think, a good example of saying, look, you know, benefits, in-work benefits, things like unemployment benefits should be frozen for 2 years. That will save £2 billion. That isn't an easy decision to make, but I think it's important. People can see it's better off, you know, that people are better off in work, and we try and keep on creating those jobs as we've done. And we find savings, including from efficiency. This Parliament, we've saved something like £20 billion by just being a bit smarter. We still don't have one company that owns all the government's buildings and makes sure we use them efficiently. So let's do things like that. Businesses have to do this every year. They don't get more efficient and then say, that's it, I finished. They think every year, how can we save money? How can we provide a better service without spending so much money?
Okay.
We've had to do that in one example, just quickly, policing.
Very.
The police have done a brilliant job. We have had
Prime
to
Minister,
reduce...
while you're talking about policing, let me bring in Zaid Malik, who is a police officer. It's almost as if we planned it.
Very good.
And we didn't. He's from the
Where
West Midlands. You've been a police officer for 22 years, haven't you, Zaid? Where are you?
I have, Kay, thank you. Prime Minister, my question to yourself is, would the Conservatives reverse their decision in the cutback to the police service, which is now more than ever overburdened and walking a tightrope without a safety net?
Well, first of all, Zaid, thank you very much for your service in the police. I know that you put your lives on the line every day to keep us safe, and I have huge respect for what the police do for us. But I was about to say what a brilliant example the police had been over the last 5 years. We did have to make reductions in spending on the police, so police budgets came down by some 20%. But at the same time, the police have done such a good job that crime has come down by almost 20%. We managed to get officers out from desk jobs onto the streets. We put more civilians into some of those roles. We made sure and the police did this themselves, forces were combining and ordering equipment and things together. So I think there's still some more efficiency that we can get out of that. But in the end, we've got to back the British police, who are the best in the world, who do a great job, and they'll always have my support.
As far as Lincolnshire Police are concerned, though, Prime Minister, the Chief Constable there said that it's on the verge of collapse. He said that last December.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, I think, you know, I understand that they're under pressure.
Is he wrong?
Well, I think if you look at Lincolnshire, in that county as well, you know, crime has come down because the police are doing a great job, and there's more we need to do using modern technology to make sure that crime continues to fall under this government. And if we do that, then we should be saving money as well.
Let's bring in... thank you, Prime Minister. Were you happy with that response? So...
No comment.
OK. Rosemary Fraser is joining us now. Hello to you, Rosemary. Where are you? What's your question?
Good evening,
Hi.
Prime
Hi,
Minister. Hi. It's 20 years this year since the passing of the Disability Discrimination Act in the UK. Yet, if you're disabled, you're still twice as likely to be unemployed. It's getting harder year on year to get vital social care support. And attitudes towards disabled people are hardening and hardening. I'd just like to know what you would do going forward to change that for Britain's 11 million disabled people.
Well, I have a very simple view about this, which is we should do everything we can to help disabled people face as few disadvantages as possible and to get genuine equality in our country. The Disability Discrimination Act was brought forward by my good friend and colleague William Hague 20 years ago, and I think it has led to some really good changes, but you're right, the job isn't done. One of the things I think we need to focus on is, as you say, getting more disabled people into work. This year has been a good year. We've got, I think, 140,000 more disabled people have got jobs. But the gap between the disabled unemployment rate and the unemployment rate for the whole country is still too big. I want to see that cut in half over the next 5 years. And I think we can do that, but we need a culture change from employers as much as from anybody. There are some employers who are absolutely brilliant, who really go out there and want to recruit disabled people because they know if they don't, they're missing out on some of the brightest, best talent in our country. But not all employers are that good, and that's why we've established something called Disability Confident to try and encourage all employers to take this approach. So I would say we've done some good work, we've got more to do, but in the end, it all comes back to the bigger picture of a strong and growing economy. If we keep the economy strong, if we keep creating jobs, we can keep solving some of these issues.
Asking your specific question, we'll come back to the economy. Are you happy with their response, Rosemary?
I'm partially happy with the response, but I still think there's an awful lot more that needs to be done. You mentioned employment. Social care is vital to help people get into and flourish in employment. Year on year, that's becoming more and more difficult. You know, the Independent Living Fund was closed. That really helps a lot of people stay in employment.
That's important that local councils have the resources to do this. We've just established this new fund, the Better Care Fund, that starts on the 1st of April. It's got £5 billion in it to try and bring health and social care together more in our country, and that could help with some of the issues that you're raising. But thank you for the question.
Let's bring in Cara Montero now. Hello to you, Cara. Good evening.
Good evening, Prime Minister.
Just behind the camera there, Prime Minister.
Hello. How are you going to convince the British public to not opt out of the EU?
Well, I think the best way... First of all, Cara, thank you for the question. We were just getting into it with Jeremy back there. Look, I think Britain is at its best when we're out there trading and cooperating and working with others in the world. We are an open country, we're a trading nation, we're part of all the most important networks, whether it's NATO or the G8 or the European Union, and we need them to work for us. But I think the problem with the European Union at the moment, it's got some good aspects, but too many things that drive people mad. People see that it's trying to become too much of a state rather than an organisation. It's trying to take too much power. And I think what we need is a new deal with Europe where we say, look, we want to be in Europe for trade and cooperation. We want that common market that we were promised all those years ago, but we don't want to be part of an ever closer union. Maybe the Eurozone countries with their own currency, maybe they need to do that. We don't. And we're going to keep the pound as our currency. Well, we will, at least if I'm Prime Minister. So if I can get a new deal from Europe, and I believe I can, I've sat around that table for the last 5 years with those other countries. If I can get that better deal, I think there's then a real prospect of saying to the British people, you choose. You can stay on this reformed basis, which would be good for Britain, or if you want, you can leave. But the British public have got to be given another choice. We haven't had one since 1975, and it's time we did.
OK. Remember when we said, Prime Minister, about questions being quite short?
Yes, sorry.
OK, we've got two more. Karen Poole is with us. Hi, Karen.
Hi. Would you like to see more NHS services provided by private companies?
Sorry, Karen, I've lost you. Where are you?
Karen's just here.
Oh, sorry.
Would you like to see more NHS services provided by private companies? Yes or no?
I'm happy if there are charities, or independent organisations that can provide a great service, free, as part of the NHS, then I think that if it's good healthcare, that's what matters to me. I love our NHS. It has done amazing things for my family. I will never forget taking my desperately ill young son, Ivan, to hospital night after night, getting into A&E, getting amazing treatment, everything that they gave him. I want to make sure that that is always there for families in our country. Now, that will always be predominantly a national health service provided by national health service providers. The private sector, the independent sector, is a tiny proportion of the total. I think it's gone from 5% to 6% under this government, a tiny increase. But if there are organisations like, for instance, Marie Curie Cancer Care or Macmillan Nurses, who provide brilliant care for loved ones, or hospices, which aren't part of the NHS, if there are great organisations like that that are helping our loved ones and they're free and the NHS and our taxes are helping to pay for them, that's OK by me.
Lady with her hand up there in the blue dress. Madam.
Hi there.
Just wait for the microphone if you would. There we go. I think we can get a little bit closer to you. There we are.
Thank you.
What would you like to say?
I'm just a little bit confused because I do remember very clearly 5 years ago that you made some very serious pledges about the NHS, and I saw your billboards, it's safe in our hands. The no top-down reorganisation of the NHS, that clearly, the reality has been very, very different. There has been a huge top-down reorganisation of the NHS. The no forced closure of local A&E maternity units was actually in your manifesto. And where I live in my borough, we had to take you and your government to court to keep our hospital open. So I feel very let down with conservative policy on the NHS, and I'm just wondering if you don't do what you say, what the promises you made last time have been broken as far as I'm concerned. So how can we trust you next time?
What I'd say, the biggest promise we made about the NHS at a time when we were going to have to make difficult cuts in public spending, as anyone, Prime Minister, when I was Prime Minister, would have to do, we said we will not cut the NHS, and we haven't. We've increased spending on the NHS by over £12.7 billion over the last 5 years.
Okay.
And because this is a really important point, can I just quickly... What we did in terms of changing the NHS is we got rid of 20,000 bureaucrats in the NHS, and we put that money into 9,000 more doctors and 7,000 more nurses. And as a result, we're treating more patients. If you take something just like cancer, we're seeing 460,000 more people and looking at their potential cancer than we were 5 years ago. So the biggest promise we made, more money, safeguarding that money and treating more patients, has been kept. And if you elect me again as your Prime Minister with a strong economy, because that's the key to afford this, we'll go on investing in our National Health Service.
OK, Prime Minister, we're almost out of time, but we've just got time for one more quick answer, if you would, please. And that is from Lagdeep J. Chand, who she had actually lost her voice, Prime Minister, but she's persevered tonight so that she can ask you a question in person.
If you could redo one thing from your time as Prime Minister, what would it be?
Oh, if you could redo one thing as your time as Prime Minister, what would it be? Well, there's definitely the thing, as I said, I haven't delivered. I promised better, less noise at Prime Minister's questions, more politeness. That certainly didn't work out. I fully accept that. Look, I think the most important thing I've had to try and do is turn the economy around, get people into jobs, get the deficit down, get the economy growing, because we were on the brink. And I wish that some of the things that we've done, like, for instance, the Help to Buy scheme that has got many more people able to buy their houses, I wish we'd done some of those things quicker. I wish we'd done some of those things sooner. Because in the end, you're going to have to make this huge choice, you know, in 42 days' time, who runs the country. And all I'd say, what I've learned in the last 5 years, is nothing that you want to do will work without a strong and growing economy. The schools we want for our children, the hospitals we want when we're ill, those things need the strong economy.
OK, have you ever had 3 shredded wheat?
Have I ever had 3 shredded wheat? I have, actually, but that was a long time ago.
We're out of time. Prime Minister, would you like to show your appreciation?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Coming next, Ed Miliband will be taking more questions from our studio audience. So do stay tuned to us here on Sky and Channel 4. Thank you, Prime Minister. Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
That last one, normally people ask...
Hello again, welcome back to Cameron and Miliband Live, the battle for number 10. Tonight, we've seen David Cameron face the questions of Jeremy Paxman and also those of our studio audience. Now it's the turn of the Labour leader, Ed Miliband. He is here in the studio and ready to meet our audience. Let's see if they're still applauding by the end of this 18-minute section. Paul Hickson, first of all. Paul, you are retired, aren't you? What's your question?
Good evening. My question is this. You sound gloomy most of the time. Are things really so bad?
No, but they could be a lot better. and that is the big argument of this election. You know, look, I think this is a choice between those who think this is as good as it gets for Britain and those who think we can do a lot better than this. I don't think it's good enough that we've got 700,000 people on 0 hours contracts. I think we can do something about it. And the Prime Minister said earlier that he couldn't live on a 0 hours contract. Well, I couldn't either. But let's do something about it. Let's turn this country into a country where if you work month after month, year after year, you don't end up on a 0 hours contract, but you have a legal right to a regular contract. That's just one of the changes that I would make. We can do a lot better than this. We're a great country.
OK, let's whiz through these, shall we? Oh, first round of applause. Paula Pearson is next. Where are you, Paula? What's your question for Mr Miliband?
Paula.
I'm proud of my working class background and I'm now a high rate taxpayer. Labour's messages often leave me feeling demonised and ashamed of earning a good salary. How can I vote for you when you make me feel like this?
Well, I'm going to try and change... Let me see if I can change your mind. Look, I think that the thing that's happening in Britain at the moment is it's the very richest in our society, and I'm talking about like the top 1%, people earning over £150,000 a year, who are doing sort of OK. And I think lots and lots of people, including on middle incomes, are finding life really tough. Now, the question is how we do something about it. And I hope you'll get a different message from me tonight, if that's the message you've been getting from me. Let me give you an example. Tuition fees. Some people have criticised me for wanting to lower the burden of tuition fees from £9,000 to £6,000 because they say it'll help middle-class families. Well, too right I want to help middle-class families because I think lots of families are saying if my son or daughter is leaving university with £44,000 of debt, that isn't a good situation. Let's do something about it with fair changes. So, look, I want a country where you feel you're not struggling, you can get on, and that's one of the changes we'd make.
If you're a socialist, does that mean that you're anti-wealth creation?
No, I think wealth creation, it says on our party card, democratic socialist. I think that wealth creation is an incredibly important part of building a more prosperous society and a fairer society. But look, the difference with me, Kay, and this is important for the audience, is I think the way we succeed is not simply with those at the top doing well, but all working people succeeding. Look, I say it's when working people succeed that Britain succeeds. Now, that might sound like a political slogan. It isn't. It's actually a reality of the way a country gets on. So if hard work's rewarded for everyone, not just the bankers with 6-figure bonuses, if you get a regular...
Sometimes 7-figure bonuses.
Or 7-figure bonuses. If you get regular hours, you know, and you've got some security if you're going out to work and doing the right thing for the country, if you're having an NHS that you can rely on, that's better for the whole country.
Okay.
I think we all benefit from that.
OK, let's bring in Luke Tucker next. Where are you, Luke? What's your question? You're from Tower Hamlets, I believe.
Yes.
Hi, Luke.
Hi. If you are Prime Minister after May the 7th, what will the budget deficit be in pounds at the end of 5 years, and how will you achieve it?
So, 75 billion we're going to inherit. We want to balance the books by the end of the Parliament, and we want to cut the deficit every year. And we're going to do it by doing 3 things. First of all, we'll have fair taxes. We're going to reverse the change that David Cameron made, cutting taxes for those earning over £150,000 a year. Secondly, there will have to be spending reductions in areas outside some priorities like health and education, because we do need to get the deficit down, and I'll make no bones about that to you. That's going to require difficult decisions. But thirdly, really important other thing we've got to do. Why is it that the Conservatives promised to eliminate the deficit and haven't done so?
Let's not talk about the Conservatives.
Well,
Let's talk about what you do. I'm sure all
It's
our
important
audience
that the
remember
lesson,
with
Kay.
Liam Byrne, though, and the note that was left behind.
I understand that. I understand that, but I want to draw a lesson. Because the reason why that hasn't happened is because living standards have fallen, so tax revenues have fallen. So the key to getting rid of the deficit is that third element, the tax changes we've announced, the spending reductions, but that key third element of raising living standards. If we raise living standards in this country, we'll also get the tax revenues in and the deficit down.
OK, let's bring in Veronica Monti next. Veronica, what's your question?
Why is Labour prepared to deny the people over here? Sorry.
Oh, hi, Veronica, yeah.
Hi. Why is Labour prepared to deny the people the freedom to choose whether they wish to see their country become a fully fledged member of the EU?
I want us to stay in the EU, Veronica. And as you say, it's not my priority to have a referendum on whether we should leave the European Union. Let me explain why. I think when I look at our country, I know what my priorities will be as Prime Minister: to tackle the cost of living crisis, to rescue our NHS, to build a future for our young people. I think leaving the EU will be a disaster for our country because I think we rely on its jobs and the trade we get from being in the EU. I think strategically for Britain, whether you want to tackle terrorism or climate change or a whole range of issues, we've got to be an outward-looking country. And so that's not my priority. Now, I have said, and this is unlikely to happen, but I have said that if there's a transfer of powers from Britain to the EU, a further transfer of powers, we'd have an in-out referendum. But it's not likely to happen. And look, that's what leadership's about. It's saying what your priority is. I don't want us to leave the EU. So why would I call a referendum in 2017 and plunge the country into 2 years of debate about something I don't want to see happen?
So just to clarify, if you win the next election, you would not call a referendum in that 5-year period?
I've said it's unlikely to happen. I've said that the lock for the British people...
That's not a definite no.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't, because of the criteria I've set. But I'm making no bones about it, Kate. It's very unlikely to happen.
OK.
Because I've said that if there's a transfer of powers, it will happen, but that doesn't seem likely at the moment.
Right, that's a politician's answer, though, isn't it?
Yep. Not sure. Not sure.
Sunil Jagota. Hello, Sunil. What's your question?
Hi, over here.
Oh, hi. Sunil, yeah.
Do you not think that your brother would have done a better job?
Oh.
Hold on. He was better qualified and better positioned.
OK. Well, it'll surprise you to know that my answer is no. Sunil, let me explain why. Look, it was a difficult contest between me and David, and it was a bruising contest. Why did I stand? I thought somebody needed to lead the Labour Party who could move us on from New Labour, because I thought that was the time that was necessary for the country and necessary for our party. And I had strong views about how we needed to change the country. I think this country is too unequal, and we've got to change it. I think New Labour was too relaxed about inequality. I think we made mistakes on foreign policy, like on Iraq. We made mistakes on immigration, too. Maybe we'll come to that. But I thought I was the best person to move the party on. And I stood because that's what I felt was the right thing for the country. So I think I am the right person for the job. I thought it then, and I think it now.
I wonder, though, Mr Miliband, what regrets you have about creating such division in your family?
It's hard. Well, it's hard. I'll make no bones about it. It's hard.
In what way is it hard?
Well, because it was bruising. I mean, you know, it was bruising for me. It was bruising for David. It's healed, or healing, I would say. Just be completely frank with you about that. But... So you did fall out, or...?
Well,
we had a very difficult contest, so it was very difficult.
Did you not talk, or...?
No, it wasn't that we didn't talk, but it was, I would say it was strained, not surprisingly. But look, I care deeply about this country. I believe I'm the right person to be Prime Minister, and I thought it when I stood in 2010. And I wouldn't have gone through all of that if I didn't have pretty strong convictions about how we need to change Britain.
Your poor mum.
Yeah, she's a pretty hardy soul.
I'm
she's
glad
a pretty hardy
to hear
soul.
it. Let's bring in Lynn Gaff now, should we? Hello to you, Lynn. What's your question this evening for us? Just in the middle there.
Hi, Lynn.
Mr Miliband, do you think socialism remains an important and evident Labour Party value? If so, why and how?
Well, I call it democratic socialism. That's what's on our party card, Lynn. Yes is the answer, because I believe in a fairer, more equal society. Now, each generation of Labour politicians puts it into practice in their own generation. Now, what does it mean today? And it goes back to the question that this lady asked, which is what I see in Britain. And, you know, this is the thing that countries all around the world are grappling with. This is a central question we face. Are we going to be countries that work for the richest and most powerful? This is what America is facing, President Obama as well. Are we going to be a country that just works for the richest and most powerful, or is everyone going to get a fair shot? Is everyone going to play by the same rules? If you're going to do the right thing, go out to work, are you going to be able to build a life for you and yourself and your family? Lots of people are doubting that in Britain. To the gentleman who asked me whether I was too gloomy, That's why I think it sometimes might sound that way, because I think people are asking, hang on a minute, this country was supposed to work for me. Why doesn't it work for me anymore? I'm doing what everyone tells me I should do. So that's what democratic socialism means to a fairer, more equal society, making this country work for working people again.
What do you think, Lynn?
I think that there needs to be revisited, those values within the Labour Party currently.
OK.
It needs to be reaffirmed.
We thought that it would... You've got your hand up there, just here in the second row. You just wanted to ask a quick follow-up question.
What's your name?
Can you just wait for the microphone? There we go, you've got it now.
What's your name?
How are you, Harry?
Harry, hi.
How are you going to be different from Nick Clegg and their broken promises, or David Cameron and his broken promises? Are you just going to sit here and sugarcoat things and sweeten things up so we can vote for you?
No.
Or are you actually going to give us some security and actually follow through your promises?
No, I'm going to follow through on my promises. Now, look, all politicians say that. You're going to have to make a judgment tonight about whether I'm going to do it. Let me give you a very specific example that goes back to this point about tuition fees. Look, in 2011, I said I wanted to cut the tuition fee to £6,000, right? And then as the Parliament wore on, some people said, Miliband's going to break his promise just like Clegg did. And, you know, it's the right thing to do to cut tuition fees to £6,000, and I'm going to do it, and I've shown how I'll pay for it. And I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, but I'm also doing it for another reason. Because trust in politics is so important. It's so important we rebuild trust. I sometimes say, Harry, I want to be the first politician to under-promise and over-deliver, not over-promise and under-deliver. Now, I'll come back in 5 years if I'm Prime Minister and you tell me whether I've achieved it or not.
Okay.
But I've tried to set out some promises that I know I can keep.
Interesting to think what politicians think about each other. And you'll remember, perhaps, we asked Matthew Brown in the first half of our town hall debate, so it's only fair to put the same question to you. What do you think are David Cameron's best qualities, given that you have previously called him a chicken and a bully?
I'd say two things about what David Cameron has achieved as Prime Minister, which I admire. The first is his commitment to equal marriage. It was hard in his party. It's the right thing to do for the country. And second, and this isn't going to be universally popular, his commitment on overseas development and 0.7%. And now there'll be some people who don't like me saying that, but you know he took a risk in the Conservative Party by saying this is the right thing to do, and he's kept to that, and I think it's right that he did.
So you think he's a decent enough bloke then? Would you have a pint with him?
I don't know whether we'd have a pint. Look, it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. Look, it's hard when you know we share a bacon sandwich or something. No, look, you know it's hard when you're in politics because you see me and him shouting at each other at Prime Minister's questions, and it's not very edifying. Let's be honest, not a great advert for politics. But as he said earlier, it's hard to avoid the back and forth.
OK, let's bring in Geoffrey Louis Reid, just here at the front. Where are you, Geoffrey? Just here.
Ed, my question to you is this. You've made it quite difficult for your supporters and for people that are undecided.
OK, that's not a great start.
Well, the reason is that you've had a few gaffes recently, and you don't really seem to be fighting for the values that your party stands for.
OK. Well, look,
meaning, you know, think places like Cressingham Gardens, which is the Labour Council in Lambeth, or museum closures because of the decimation of arts budgets and austerity in general.
Okay.
Well, look, Geoffrey, first of all, austerity, Tory austerity is happening, and the cuts you're talking about in the councils are happening because of the Conservative government's decisions. Our spending plans are very different from theirs for the future. They want cuts bigger in the next 3 years than the last 5. But let me go to the other point, which I think is implicit in your question about gaffes, so-called, right? I'm not going to win a contest for who looks best eating a bacon sandwich. I think we can all agree about that. And
well, he's not happy with your answer. They're shaking heads and all sorts of things.
Right,
Can we get a microphone there, sir?
Well, look, can I just make this one point and then I'll do
very
it from the
quickly,
gentleman.
if you would.
Look, what I stand for, what I think matters in politics, is ideas to change the country, principles, sticking to your principles when you've got powerful opponents like the energy companies or the banks or Rupert Murdoch, and frankly, decency. You know, reaching out to people who are the most vulnerable in our society.
OK. So, what did you want to come back with?
My question is, everyone in this country remembers 13 years of a Labour government under Blair and Brown, OK? And you talk about austerity to us, but the reason there's austerity is because all the money was spent, everything was thrown away, nothing was planned for a rainy day, and all I hear is you say, well, it was the global economy and it was a global crisis, yes, but the liberalisation of the banks and everything came from your party. And what I want to know is, if people are going to vote Labour, can you promise us that you've learnt from the mistakes that led to the mess that we're now in?
What's your name, sir? Tim. let me be very specific on that, Tim. We were wrong. Sorry,
Dean.
Dean, sorry. We were wrong on the regulation of the banks. We got it wrong. The banks were under-regulated, right? Now, other people were saying we should regulate them even less, but we were wrong, along with countries all around the world and regulators around the world. I'm sorry we got it wrong. And we've got to learn from that, and I believe I have learnt from that in my 5 years as leader of the opposition.
But has Ed balls?
He absolutely has.
Because I don't understand how you...
He was the first person to say we've got to make sure that the banks are properly regulated in the future. But let me say something else. The banks have got to work better for our businesses. That is a problem that goes back decades, these historic problems that we've got to solve.
OK, let me just put the final question from Andy Palmer. Andy's saying, why is Labour only neck and neck with the Conservatives in the opinion polls after 5 years of opposition? Sky News poll of polls today, 279 seats for you, 278 for the Conservatives. You'd be steaming ahead and you're not. Why?
Look, I take an old-fashioned view on this, which is let's let the people decide in 6 weeks' time, Kay. I'm not a commentator. Look, we were coming out of government in 2010. It's hard when you're having to be a one-term opposition. But the thing I'm interested in is this big battle about the future of the country, and the people are the boss. And let's see what they decide on May the 7th.
Would you believe we're out of time?
We're out of time.
Already?
Already. Oh, my goodness.
18 minutes gone. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Mr. Malone. And thank you all very much indeed. We've not finished just yet, though. Coming next, Mr. Miliband's head-to-head with Jeremy Paxman. That's going to be worth watching. Stay tuned.
This is Cameron and Miliband live, the battle for number 10. With me now is the Labour leader, Ed Miliband. Ed Miliband, do you think Britain is full?
In terms of immigration?
Yes.
I wouldn't describe it that way, no. I think we've got very high levels of migration. I think that we do need to try and get those levels of migration down, particularly low-skilled migration.
Because they're too high now.
Yeah, but I'm telling you one thing very important. I'm not going to make a false promise on this, because look, David Cameron did make that promise on tens of thousands of net
You've
migration.
got form on false promises on immigration, haven't you?
Me personally.
Your government,
yeah,
your
we got
party.
We got it wrong.
You got it completely wrong.
We got it wrong, yeah.
Your figures were farcical.
Yeah, they were wrong.
Yeah.
Let me say two things though about this, which are important.
Okay,
let me just make the point about immigration, because you asked me a question. Let me answer it. Look, I think that we benefit from our diversity. Immigrants over the years have made a big contribution to our country, but we do need proper controls. Let me just say this, Jeremy. A Labour government would say that if people come here, they can't get benefits for the first 2 years, and we will do something else.
I'm not talking about benefits.
But you're talking about immigration.
I'm talking about numbers.
Right, and let me tell you, the way we will...
Supposing we got to a figure of 70 million in 10 or 15 years, population in this country, is that acceptable or not?
I'm not going to get into your hypotheticals. Let me say, I think we can get low-skill migration down.
So...
I'm not going to start speculating about numbers. Great. No, I'm not saying that.
75 million? 80 million?
Come on.
95 million? 100 million?
Let me say what I'm going to do. Let me say what I'm going to do, because that's what matters, rather than speculating about figures. I want to get low-skill migration down, and I think the controls we're talking about, not just on benefits, but on stopping the undercutting of wages, because people are being brought into the country to undermine the minimum wage, and various other things, I think they will help to get low-skill migration down. But if what you're saying to me is, would it be better for our country, for example, to withdraw from the European Union?
I haven't mentioned the European Union.
No, I'll tell you why I'm saying
this.
You're
making up a question to yourself.
I'm not. I'm saying there's a big choice at this election, Jeremy. There is a choice at this election. I believe that we can bring in controls on migration, sensible controls, but I'm not going to make false promises or put forward false solutions either.
I'm just asking you if you think there's any natural limit to the population of this country.
And I'm not going to get drawn into a speculation about a number.
You don't think there is a natural limit?
No, of course there are limits, but the limits are expressed
in the... What, are you keeping them to yourself?
The limits are expressed in the decisions you take year by year, and I've explained some of the decisions that we'll make.
So, as it seems to you now, there is no figure that you're willing to share with the public?
I'm not going to pluck a figure out of the air about the correct level.
Well, I assume you've thought about it.
Yeah, I've thought about the right thing to do on migration, and we need to have controls on migration, and I've explained some of those controls, but I'm not going to pluck a figure out of the air.
There's no finite limit. Now, you've already conceded that when your party was last in government, it got immigration completely wrong.
Sure.
You were predicting figures of between 5,000 and 13,000 immigrants a year from the expansion of the EU in 2004, and actually something like 400,000 people came in. That's the entire population of Malta equivalent. What else did that government do wrong when you were last in power?
I think there's two things that I would mention in addition to that. By the way, I'm proud of many of the things we did, but two things I would mention. Well, first of all, I think we were too relaxed about inequality. I think the gap got bigger, and I think lots of people fell behind.
Did you borrow too much?
I think that the global financial crisis is what drove borrowing up.
Did you borrow
too much? The figure was too high by the end of our time in government as a result of the global financial crisis. Well, I'm saying that the figure was too high as a result of the global financial crisis.
Did you spend too much?
Well, I think there were spending programmes that maybe weren't as good as they could have been, but I don't believe, that I don't believe... No,
it's a clue, come on.
No, it's an important point.
Which ones weren't quite as good as they should have been?
Look, it's an important point. No government gets it completely right.
It's a very important point. That's why it's important to have some details.
Yeah, OK, let me just say, I think the overall point was the financial crisis caused by overspending by Labour. No, the answer is no. I think investment in health and education...
You're asking yourself a question I haven't asked you. My question was, did you borrow too much? You think, no, you didn't borrow too much. Did you spend too much? Some programmes, perhaps.
Now you're asking yourself questions.
Well, I'm trying to summarise your position according to the questions you've been asked rather than the questions you've asked yourself.
Look, what I would say is, for example, the Dome was not a good example of the way money is spent. Governments make mistakes. Governments make mistakes. There are always inefficiencies in government. Of course there are inefficiencies. Probably too many reorganisations of public services which waste money. Of course that's right. But I'm talking about the overall picture, Jeremy. But the other thing I'd say to you is, look, let's talk about the future, because there's a big... Right, OK.
Let's talk about the future, because virtually every single one of your forecasts on the future of the economy during this present government has been wrong, hasn't it? You forecast that unemployment would rise, you forecast that wages would fall. At one point, I think you even forecast that inflation would rise. Inflation is now at 0.
Wages have fallen. People are £1,600 a year worse off than they were when this government came to power. It's the worst record on living standards since the 1920s. And that is the argument of this election. Look, David Cameron wants to say...
unemployment has fallen?
Hang on a minute. You asked about wages. You said I was wrong that wages had fallen.
No, I said forecasts were wrong.
No, you said that I forecast that wages would fall, Jeremy.
You did.
And they did, yes, and I was right, right? They did fall.
Oh, are you also claiming to be right on unemployment?
Well, you asked me about wages.
I didn't ask you 3 things. I mentioned 3 things. Unemployment, I mentioned wage levels, and I mentioned inflation.
On unemployment, I was quoting the Office of Budget Responsibility forecast. Now, as it turned out, that forecast turned out to be wrong. But look, let's go to the big picture here. The big picture is, of this election, do we think the economy is fixed? David Cameron was on earlier. He says things are good, right? And things are fine. I don't think things are fine for the reasons that I set out in the town meeting earlier on, because I think we are too much based on low wages. I think work is too insecure. I think our young people are burdened down by a lack of opportunity, and that is what's got to change about the country.
What would you cut?
Well, let me explain. We've said outside areas like education and health, key protected areas, there are going to be reductions in spending. And we've set out some of those cuts, like the winter fuel allowance for pensioners with incomes over £42,000 a year. We've talked about the ways in which we will cut money from through efficiencies in the police, in local government. We've said, for example, that child benefit will be restricted to 1%. We said we'll reverse the...
What does that come to?
Well, the figure is at least hundreds of millions, more than £1 billion. But look, that's not the point, because let me explain. We're going to have to make these decisions when we're in government. But I've got to set out an overall approach. And I have set out an overall approach. I've set out an overall approach which says, as I said earlier, it's about fair taxes. It's about... I'm a Labour leader going into the election saying we're going to reduce spending outside a small minority of areas. Tony Blair never went into an election saying that.
But what Tony Blair did is Tony Blair's affair, isn't it?
No, it's a point about my approach, Jeremy. I'm not denying the need.
Would overall spending be greater?
No, it would fall.
You would spend less than the Tories. Would you borrow more than the Tories?
There are going to be reductions outside the protected departments. We're going to be reducing spending.
Yes, I'm talking about overall spending. Overall spending would not increase; it would decrease.
I think it's likely to fall. Yeah.
Likely.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a weasel word, likely, isn't it?
No, I'm setting out the direction of travel. I'm saying
OK, I'm confused about various of your policies, as is obvious. Let's take energy policy. Now, you used to believe that raising energy bills was a great way of helping the environment. Now you believe in cutting energy bills. Now you believe that somehow getting people to have a better deal on the consumption of oil and gas is better for the environment.
I never said that raising energy bills was a way to solve climate change. Let me explain.
It was a levy.
Well, let me explain. Look, I always said, when I was Energy Secretary, that there will be upward pressures on bills as a result of the need to transition to a green economy. But I also said that we need to make sure the energy market was fair. And you can't use climate change as an excuse for ripping off the consumer. And that is what's been happening with the energy companies. And look, it goes to another big choice at this election. Who's actually going to stand up to the energy companies and say, we are going to freeze bills until 2017 so prices can only fall. We are going to give the regulator powers to cut prices so that actually wholesale price reductions get passed on. Sure, there are upward pressures on bills in the long run, but that makes it all the more important that you reform the market to make it fair.
Can you help us with another of your policies, the mansion tax? According to your leader in Scotland, this is a way of taking money out of the southeast of England and giving it to Scotland.
No.
That is what he said.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't what he said.
Well, he said specifically there weren't enough properties in Scotland to raise the mansion tax that would fund the Scottish NHS. It was a way of taking money from the southeast of England and spending it in Scotland.
Shall I explain?
Do, please.
So we're going to levy a mansion tax on homes above £2 million. Now, it is true that most of those homes are in the southeast. And it's also true that there are consequentials of that spending for Scotland. That's the way the United Kingdom works.
Consequentials?
Well, it's the way the money gets distributed. And that some of that money will be spent in Scotland. But let me make this point, because it's really important. This is part of being a United Kingdom. If there are young people who are unemployed in Newcastle, and the money for a banker's bonus tax, more of it is raised in London, we help those young people in Newcastle. If another tax falls somewhere else, then we help people across the United Kingdom. If there are poor kids in London, we help them. So that is part of being a United Kingdom. You have redistribution across the United Kingdom. So this is absolutely a principle of a country that stays together and looks after each other.
What about Alex Salmond's other types of blood money that he would like to exempt or exert from England? What about, for example, a promise not to recommission Trident, perhaps move it out of Scotland? Would you go along with that?
No.
No, you wouldn't. What about starting the high-speed rail line back to front, as it were, in Scotland?
No, look, I'm not going to get into a bargaining game with Alex Salmond. Look, he's not...
You are?
No, I'm not.
You are. If you have any chance of forming a government, you will, won't you?
No, don't be so presumptuous. You've got 6 weeks to go. You've got 6 weeks to go. You don't get to decide the election results 6 weeks before the general election. You're important, Jeremy, but not that important. It's the British people. It's the British people.
I don't want to decide it.
No, come on.
You know there is
no. It's the British people. No. Let me finish the point. It's the British people.
Seriously suggesting you can get an overall majority.
Absolutely right.
Right.
Absolutely right.
Okay. Right. In that event, you would be leader of our country. You know what people say about you because it's hurtful, but you can't be immune to it. A bloke on the tube said to me last week, Ed Miliband goes into a room with Vladimir Putin, the door is closed, 2 minutes later the door is opened again and Vladimir Putin is standing there smiling and Ed Miliband is all over the floor in pieces.
Was that David Cameron who you met on the tube?
No, it wasn't. I don't think he uses the tube very much. But
that's rather unfair to him, I think.
It is unfair.
Yeah.
But you understand what the point is here. The point is people think you're just not tough enough.
Well, let me tell you, right? Let me tell you. OK.
Come on.
Let me tell you. OK, in the summer of 2013, this government proposed action in Syria, the bombing of Syria, right? I was called into a room by David Cameron and Nick Clegg, because President Obama had been on the phone, the leader of the free world, right? I listened to what they said, and over those days I made up my mind, and we said no, right? Now, I think standing up to the leader of the free world, I think shows a certain toughness, I would say.
Are you proud of what's happened in Syria since?
I'm not proud of it, no. It's a failure of the international community. But what I'm not a pacifist. So I did support action in Libya, and David Cameron talked about how I supported action against ISIS. But am I tough enough? Hell yes, I'm tough enough.
Do you think... Well, how has this impression got out there? How is it that you are less popular than your party, that even your own MPs consider you a liability? How has that happened?
Look, I don't commentate on these things.
If I can avoid it, no.
Exactly. You make my point for me. Look, there's 6 weeks to go till the general election. The people here and the people at home will make up their mind about me and about the country and what kind of country they want. But, you know, frankly, it is water off a duck's back, honestly.
So when Simon Danczuk says, I find when I go and stand on the doorstep, Ed Miliband is a liability, you are unaware of that?
Look, Simon Danczuk's entitled to his views. The only thing I can do, the thing I've learnt most in this job, let me tell you, is to be yourself, right? That's what I am. And, you know, people have to decide. Do they want my ideas? Do they want my principles when I've stood up to not just to President Obama, but Rupert Murdoch, the energy companies, the banks, fighting for ordinary people, which is what I believe in and what I came into politics for? And do they want somebody who will think every day about how they put working people first in our country. And you know, I don't care what the newspapers write about me, because what I care about is what's happening to the British people. And I know this country can be so much better. And that's what I came into politics for. And newspapers can write what they like. The bloke on the tube can say what he likes. I don't care, because I care about the British people and what happens to them.
The thing is, they see you as a North London geek.
Who cares? Who cares? Who does?
Well, it was mentioned earlier by a member of the audience. A lot of people, when they look at your candidacy for the most powerful job in the land, they look at you and they think, what a shame it's not his brother.
Well, look, you know, that's obviously not the way I see it, is it?
No, of course it isn't.
No, exactly. You know, look, you need a toughness in this job. You need a toughness. People have thrown a lot at me over 4.5 years, right? But I'm a pretty resilient guy. And I've been underestimated at every turn. People said I wouldn't become leader, and I did. People said 4 years ago, he can't become Prime Minister. I think I can. You're saying I can't win a majority. I think I can. So let people underestimate me. But what I care about is what is happening to the British people in their lives. And I think I can change it. And I know I'm the right man for the job. That's why I'm sitting here. And that's why I believe that I'm the best choice to be Prime Minister.
Ed Miliband, thank you.
Thank you.
You okay, Ed?
Sorry?
You all right?
Yeah. You?